The agriculturist ordered a bride, but a acclaimed prostitute absolved off the wagon. That should accept been the end of it. Should accept been simple. But annihilation about Violet McCall was simple, and Tobias Crow was about to apprentice that. Some mistakes change everything. The dust hadn't alike acclimatized about the wagon auto. A back he knew article was wrong. The woman continuing afore his agronomical abode wasn't the plain, God-fearing male adjustment helpmate he'd corresponded with for 3 months. This woman wore a blood-soaked dress that hugged every curve, had corrective aperture that smiled like she knew secrets he'd never dream of, and agitated herself with the affectionate of aplomb that could achieve a man balloon his own name. Tobias stood arctic on his porch, hat in his hands, watching her analysis his acreage like she endemic it. She had a tremendous beard, affianced up in a appearance too busy for borderland life, and aback her blooming eyes met his. He acquainted. Article about face in his chest that had annihilation to do with disappointment and aggregate to do with danger. The driver, a asperous man with abashed hands, climbed bottomward from his bench and approached with accessible reluctance. "Mr. Crow?" he asked, admitting his articulation agitated the accent of a man accustomed bad news. "I got your amalgamation. Here. Package?" As if the best admirable woman Tobias had any time apparent was annihilation added than a sack of Adam or a new saddle. He stepped off the porch, his boots alveolate adjoined the boards, and approved to achieve faculty of what he was seeing. The Accord had declared a added alleged Sarah Beth Collins from Missouri. Practical, modest, attractive for a abiding home and honest work. This woman looked like she'd never done an honest day's assignment in her life, and adherence seemed as adopted to her as snow in summer. "There's been some affectionate of mistake," Tobias said, his articulation rougher than he intended. "I ordered a wife, not—" He gestured helplessly at the eyes in red, continuing beside his fence post. Violet McCall laughed, and the complete was, like music played in a alehouse at midnight, admirable and alarming all at once. "No mistake, darling," she said, her articulation accustomed a southern drawl that fabricated his name complete like honey. "Admitting I accept the bearings is added complicated than you were led to believe." She accomplished into a babyish beaded purse and pulled out a bankrupt letter. The cardboard yellowed and beat from handling. "Sarah Beth Collins beatific me in her place. Said to acquaint you she began adoration and couldn't buck to leave her missionary work." Violet's smile angry sharp. "She additionally said to acquaint you that what you absolutely charge isn't a wife, but addition who understands the apple as it absolutely is." Tobias took the letter with easily that weren't absolutely steady. Sarah Beth's accustomed autography covered the page, but the words fabricated no sense. She wrote about a woman who would serve him bigger than any acceptable wife could. Addition, who had lived abundant activity to acknowledge what he was offering. She wrote about Violet McCall like she was sending him a allowance instead of a scandal. But there was article abroad in the letter, article that fabricated his claret run cold. Sarah Beth mentioned men attractive for Violet, alarming men who wouldn't stop until they begin her. She wrote about debts that couldn't be paid with money, and mistakes that followed a actuality aloft accompaniment lines. "What affectionate of agitation are you active from?" Tobias asked, folding the letter and belief her face. For aloof a moment the assured affectation slipped, and he saw article raw and atrocious in her eyes. "The affectionate that gets bodies killed," she said quietly. "But don't worry, cowboy. I don't plan on blockage affiliated abundant for it to bolt up with me." That's aback he noticed the disciplinarian was already aback on his wagon, reins in hand, accessible to leave afterwards alike auction her trunk. That's aback he accomplished. This wasn't an aberration at all, but article far added dangerous. Addition had beatific Violet McCall to him, animate absolutely what affectionate of woman she was, and animate absolutely what affectionate of agitation would follow. The wagon abolished in a billow of dust. Abrogation Tobias abandoned with a woman who belonged in his apple about as abundant as he acclaimed belonged in a cattle pen. Violet stood altogether still, watching him with those artful blooming eyes, cat and mouse, to see what affectionate of man he absolutely was. You can't break here, he said. Admitting alike as the words larbored his mouth, he knew how alveolate they sounded. The abutting boondocks was a 2-day ride, and the sun was already biconcave adjoin the horizon. This is a admirable ranch. I accept the acceptability to consider. Respectable? She tasted the babble like it was article bitter. That's a affluence for bodies who've never had to accept amid their acceptability and their life. She absolved to join him with achieve that seemed to add measurement the ambit amid them, like a hunter stalking prey. But I accept your concern, Mr. Crow. A woman like me could ruin a man like you aloof by animation the aforementioned air. The way she said his name fabricated article bind in his chest. He'd spent 3 years abandoned on this ranch. 3 years aback his aboriginal wife died in accouchement forth with their son. 3 years of talking to horses and beasts because beastly babble had become an affluence he couldn't afford. Now this alarming adorableness was attractive at him like she could see beeline through to all his bareness and need. It's not aloof about reputation, he said, aggravating to accumulate his articulation steady. You said yourself, there are men attractive for you. Alarming men. I won't accept that affectionate of agitation brought to my land. Violet agee her head, and for the aboriginal time a back dispatch off that wagon, she looked absolutely analytical. About him. You abashed of a little danger, cowboy, or are you abashed of me? Afore he could answer, she was abutting abundant that he could aroma her perfume. Article alien and big ticket that had no business absolute in his simple world. She accomplished out and affected the letter in his hands, her fingers abrasion, adjoin his knuckles. Sarah Beth wrote added than what you apprehend aloud, she said softly. She told me about your wife, about the baby, about how you've been dying a little added anniversary day in this abandoned house. Her articulation agitated a charity that seemed at allowance with aggregate abroad about her. She anticipation maybe addition who accepted accidentability be absolutely what you needed. The words hit him like a concrete blow. Sarah Beth had never mentioned animate about Martha and the babyish in any of her belletristes to him. How could she possibly apperceive capacity he'd never aggregate with anyone? How did she apperceive about my wife? He asked, his articulation about aloft a whisper. Violet's smile was sad now. All the aciculate edges beat bland by article that ability accept been 18-carat sympathy. Sarah Beth Collins and I accept added history than you ability think. We both. Abstruse adamantine acquaint about what happens to women who assurance the amiss men. That's aback he noticed the babyish blister forth her jawline. About arresting unless you knew area to look. That's aback he saw the way she captivated herself, consistently accessible to run or fight. That's aback he accomplished that whatever agitation she was active from had already apparent her in agency that wouldn't ablution off. The men attractive for me, she continued, her articulation bottomward to article about vulnerable. They're not aloof dangerous. They're affiliated to bodies with affiliated ability and best memories. Bodies who don't absolve debts or balloon faces. A Arctic ran bottomward his aback that had annihilation to do with the black air. What affectionate of people? Violet looked to join the border area the sun was painting the sky the blush of blood. The affectionate who own board and sheriffs. The affectionate who achieve bodies disappear. She angry aback to him and he saw absolute abhorrence abaft the confidence. But they don't apperceive about this abode yet. That distinct babble abashed in the air amid them like a blackmail and a promise. Yet the aboriginal stars were actualization aback. Tobias assuredly fabricated his decision. One night, he said, his articulation accustomed the weight of a man who'd already aloft a band he couldn't uncross. You can break in the bedfellow allowance tonight, but appear morning, you'll charge to acquisition about abroad to go. Violet's smile was altered this time, softer about the edges, like she hadn't accepted alike that abundant consideration. One night? It is. Afresh she confused to join her trunk, still sitting area the disciplinarian had larboard it, and began unfastening the covering straps. Admitting I should acquaint you, Mr. Crow, I'm not absolutely the blazon of abode bedfellow you're acclimated to. Entertaining. He watched her attempt with the abundant block and begin himself dispatch advance to advice, afore he'd fabricated the acquainted accommodation to do so. a back his easily covered chastening on the assumption handle. She looked up at him with article that ability accept been surprise. I may not accept of your profession, he said quietly, but I was aloft to amusement ladies with respect. Lady? She laughed. But there was no acerbity in it this time. It's been the affiliated time aback anyone alleged me that. She let him lift the trunk, and he was addled by how ablaze it seemed for Addition who looked like she endemic the world. Best of my accoutrements had to be larboard behind. Traveling ablaze makes it easier to disappear. Central the house, Tobias lit the oil lamps and showed her to the additional allowance Martha had consistently hoped would be a nursery. The irony wasn't absent on him, bringing a woman of ambiguous advantage into the allowance area he dreamed of adopting children. It's not much, he said, ambience her block at the bottom of the attenuated bed, but it's apple pie and private. Violet ran her fingers forth the check quilt, her draft affable as if she was abashed it ability disappear. It's perfect, she said, and he heard article in her articulation he hadn't expected. Gratitude, absolute gratitude, not the convenance agreeableness she'd beat like armor a back dispatch off that wagon. There's alpha baptize in the basin and apple pie towels in the chest. I'll accept coffee accessible at dawn. He angry adjoined the door, afresh stopped. Violet, those men you mentioned, how affiliated afore they amount out area you've gone. She was quiet for so affiliated he anticipation she ability not answer. Aback, she assuredly spoke. Her articulation was about audible. They had Addition watching Sarah Beth. Addition who's been tracking every letter, every acquaintance she's made. She looked at him with eyes that captivated too abundant knowledge. They apperceive about this place, Tobias. They've consistently known. The claret in his veins angry to ice water. What? Are you saying I'm adage Sarah Beth didn't accelerate me actuality to save me? She beatific me actuality to save you. Violets easily were abashed now. The assured barefaced absolutely abandoned. The men attractive for me. They don't aloof appetite me back. They appetite to achieve an archetype out of anyone who's helped. Me, anyone who's apparent me kindness. How long? His articulation was flat, baleful calm. They were 3 canicule abaft me aback I larboard Kansas City. Maybe below now. She captivated her accoutrements about herself like she was aggravating to authority the pieces together. I anticipation I could break one night, get some rest, and be gone afore sunrise. But if they're tracking Sarah Beth's correspondence, they already apperceive I exist. They already apperceive everything. Her articulation absurd on the aftermost word. Your name, your ranch, apparently alike what you had for breakfast 3 weeks ago. These aren't aloof criminals, Tobias. They're affiliated to territorial politicians, federal marshals, men with assets you can't imagine. Outside, article confused in the black aloft his fence line. It ability except been a coyote, or the wind active the brush. But Tobias had spent abundant nights abandoned on this acreage to apperceive the aberration amid accustomed sounds and article abroad entirely. They're already here, aren't they? He whispered. Tobias confused to the window and peered through the gap in the curtains. The annex corrective his acreage in argent and shadow, absolute annihilation but abandoned affirmation in the aphotic outline of his barn. But article acquainted wrong, like the air itself was captivation its breath. False alarm, he said, admitting. His duke remained on the burglar eyes he kept by the door. Apparently aloof my acuteness active wild, Violet abutting him at the window, continuing abutting abundant that he could feel the amore beaming from her skin. Your acuteness didn't survive 3 years abandoned on a borderland agronomical by actuality careless, she said softly. If article feels wrong, it apparently is. She was right, and they both knew it. The blackout alfresco was too complete, too perfect. Alike his horses seemed almighty quiet, and his livestock had consistently been bigger than any babysitter at analysis danger. Tell me about Sarah Beth, he said. Defective to accept how he'd been fatigued into this web afterwards his knowledge. How did she apperceive about Martha and the baby? I never mentioned them in my letters. Violet leaned to join the window frame, her absorption apparitional in the glass. Sarah Beth Collins isn't who you anticipate she is, she said afterwards, a affiliated moment. Her absolute name is Sarah Beth Morrison. She was affiliated to a territorial adjudicator in Missouri, a man with access to some actual alarming people. The name Morrison hit him like a concrete blow. Adjudicator Morrison had been mentioned in newspapers aloft 3 territories, consistently in affiliation with arguable rulings that advantaged affluent acreage owners and railroad barons over accepted settlers. She was his wife until she apparent what he was absolutely complex in. Violet continued. Beastly trafficking, acreage fraud, political bribery that went all the way to Washington. Aback she approved to leave him. He had her declared mentally amateur and bound away. How did she escape? She didn't. I bankrupt her out. Violet's articulation agitated a pride that abashed him. Adjudicator Morrison endemic the brothel area I worked. He acclimated it to accommodation politicians and businessmen, acquisition secrets he could use for leverage. Sarah Beth and I became a company during his visits, and aback I abstruse what he'd done to her. I couldn't angle by and watch. Pieces of the addle were assuredly alpha to fit together, but the account they formed was added alarming than annihilation Tobias had imagined. So the men hunting you assignment for Adjudicator Morrison, and now they're hunting Sarah Beth too, forth with anyone who's helped either of us. She angry to face him fully, and he saw 18-carat anguish in her eyes. I didn't apperceive she'd vinagnate with you. I didn't apperceive she'd beatific me to addition innocent, but you came anyway. I was desperate. A back addition offers you a lifeline. You don't ask 2 abounding questions about area it leads. She accomplished out and affected his arm. Her fingers balmy adjoin his skin. But now I've abject you into article that could get you killed. And I can't animate with that. Outside, one of his horses whinnied softly. The complete accustomed agenda of all overs that fabricated both of them freeze. Tobias had endemic those animals for years, and knew every complete they made. That wasn't the alarm of a horse analysis, a predator, or reacting to weather. That was the complete of a horse-acquainted beastly strangers. How abounding men are we talking about? Tobias asked, already effective adjoin his gun cabinet. Morrison keeps a clandestine aegis force of atatomic 6 men. Ex-military, ex-law enforcement, the affectionate who ask questions afterwards, they cull the trigger. Violet's articulation was steady, but her easily were shaking. They're able killers, Tobias. This isn't some borderland amends you can achieve with a fair fight. He pulled out his shotgun and began loading shells with confidence deficiency. Maybe not, but this is my acreage, and I apperceive every inch of it bigger than they do. You don't understand, she said urgently. They don't aloof annihilate people, they abort them. Your reputation, your livelihood, anybody you've any time cared about. Morrison has board and sheriffs in his abridged aloft bristles territories. That's aback they heard the complete that accepted their affliction fears. The careful, advised, footsteps of addition aggravating actual adamantine not to be heard. Tobias motioned for Violet to break low as he crept to join the advanced door. The footsteps had stopped, which somehow acquainted added alarming than if they'd continued. Whoever was out there knew how to coursing beastly prey. 3 years ago, Violet whispered, her articulation about audible. You filed a affirmation adjoin. The Territorial Railroad Commission, do you remember? He froze, his duke on the aperture handle. Of advance, he remembered. The railroad had approved to run advance through his acreage afterwards compensation, claiming eminent domain. He'd fought them in cloister and won, but the achievement had amount him best of his accumulation and fabricated him enemies in aerial places. Adjudicator Morrison was the one who disqualified adjoin you initially, she continued. Afore the address went to federal court, your case amount him a abundant allurement from the railroad barons. Aggregate clicked into abode with awful clarity. This wasn't about Violet at all. Not entirely. This was about clearing an old score, eliminating a man who'd had the adventurousness to angle up to base territorial politics. Sarah Beth beatific you actuality because she knew they were already planning to appear for me, he said, the ability hitting him like a concrete blow. She anticipation if I was here, if it looked like you were harboring an accepted fugitive. They could absolve whatever they planned to do to you. Violet's articulation agitated a weight of answerability that fabricated his chest tight. She was aggravating to accord you a angry adventitious by authoritative abiding you knew crisis was coming. A window burst in the back of the house. followed anon by the abundant bang of boots on his kitchen floor. These weren't men who planned to booty prisoners or ask questions. They'd appear to accomplishment what the acknowledged arrangement had, bootless to accomplish. Tobias effective Violet's duke and pulled her adjoin the back door, but added sounds. From that administration told them their escape avenue was already cut off. They were surrounded, trapped in the abode he'd congenital with his own hands, the home area he'd planned to accession a family. The basis cellar, he whispered. Arch her adjoin a buried allurement aperture abreast the fireplace. It connects to an old mine haft. We can get out through the barn. Tobias Crow, articulation alleged from outside. Calm and professional. This is Deputy Marshal Crawford. We accept a federal accreditation for the arrest of Violet McCall and any actuality harboring an accepted fugitive. Federal Marshal. That meant Morrison's ability affiliated alike added than Violet had realized. A territorial adjudicator with federal law administration access was added, alarming than any outlaw gang. We perceive you're both inside, the articulation continued. Surrender now and we'll achieve this accessible on anybody involved. Violet awkward his duke and he acquainted her trembling. They're not actuality to arrest anyone, she whispered. Crawford works for Morrison directly. I've apparent him before. Abundant footsteps confused through his kitchen. Methodical and searching. Added bottle broke this time from his bedchamber window. They were administering a allowance by allowance search, which meant they had maybe a count of 4 actuality discovered. Tobias aerialed the trapdoor as agilely as he could. Absolute the attenuated board ladder that led bottomward into darkness. The basis apartment had been dug by the antecedent owner, a batty man who'd feared Indian attacks that never came. Now, it ability be the abandoned affair continuing amid them and death. Ladies first, he whispered, but Violet befuddled her head. If article happens to you, I'm asleep anyway. You go first. Her blooming eyes were angry in the lamplight. Besides, cowboy, I've been active from killers best than you have. Before he could argue, she leaned advanced and kissed him bendable and quick and desperate. Her aperture tasted like abhorrence and assurance and article that ability except been ope. That's in case we don't achieve it, she aside adjoin his mouth. Afresh the advanced aperture exploded entering, and their time ran out. Tobias abandoned through the trappo first, landing adamantine in the attenuated amplitude below. The basis apartment smelled of apple and old potatoes, but the air was breathable, and the adit continued to join the barn aloof as he remembered, aloft him. Violet followed. Affairs the allurement aperture bankrupt abaft her aloof as boots thundered aloft his active allowance floor. Where's that tunnel? She whispered, her articulation bound with controlled panic. He effective her duke, and led her through the darkness. Activity forth the asperus-hewn walls with his chargeless hand. The adit was narrow, about advanced abundant for one person, and they had to move distinct book adjoin what he hoped was still the applicable exit. Abaft them, deadened choir echoed through the house. Check every room, tear the abode afar if you accept to. Crawford wants them alive, addition articulation replied. Morrison's orders, Violet stumbled abaft him, communicable herself adjoin the adit wall. Why alive? She whispered. Morrison's never cared about befitting assemblage animation before. That was a catechism Tobias didn't appetite to exceed too carefully. Men like adjudicator Morrison didn't accumulate bodies animate out of mercy. They kept them animate because they bear something. And whatever Morrison bare from them was acceptable worse than a quick death. The adit began to abruptness upward, which meant they were abutting the barn foundation. Tobias could aroma hay and horse leather. Accustomed sense that should accept been comforting, but now acquainted like a allurement cat and mouse to spring. If Crawford's men were as able as Violet claimed, they'd accept addition watching the accessible escape routes. There's article else, Violet said agilely as they climbed. Article I didn't acquaint you about Sarah Beth's letter. Alike now, alike with armed killers analytic his house, she was still captivation aback information. What? She wrote about a safe. Said you affiliated one from your wife's ancestors forth, with some abstracts that ability be admired to the amiss people. Violet's animation was affected from the ascend and the fear. Morrison doesn't aloof appetite to annihilate you because of the railroad case. He wants whatever Martha's ancestors labored behind. Tobias, chock-full aggressive, so aback that Violet bumped into his back. Martha's ancestors safe. He'd abandoned about it completely. A abundant adamant box that had appear with added affiliated items he'd stored in the barn loft. Martha's ancestor had been an architect for the territorial government, for his death. A man who mapped railroad routes and mineral deposits aloft 3 states. Analysis maps. He breathed. Her ancestor accurate ore deposits and baptized rights that the government never clearly recorded. Maps that could be account millions to the appropriate buyers or acclimated to abort railroad affairs that were based on apocryphal bounded claims. Violet's articulation agitated a new understanding. This isn't about you filing one acknowledged claiming to bias. This is about you accidentally inheriting affirmation that could accompany Bottomward Morrison's absolute operation. Aloft them, the barn aperture creaked open. Footsteps confused aloft the board attic with accurate precision, and hay rustled as addition searched the stalls. They were trapped amid the men in the abode, and whoever was now analytic there abandoned. Exit. We charge those maps, Violet aside urgently. They're the abandoned affair befitting us alive. As affiliated as Morrison doesn't apperceive area they are, he can't allow to annihilate us. The loft, Tobias replied. 20 FT aloft, whoever's in my barn appropriate now. Through the attenuate board floorboards aloft their heads, they could apprehend. A man effective absolutely from arrest to stall. The chase was thorough, professional, and accepting afterpiece to the added avenue with anniversary casual second. That's a back Tobias accomplished the baleful blemish in their plan. The added avenue was anon below the barn attic area Martha's safe was hidden. To ability their abandoned advantage adjoined Morrison, they'd accept to apparent in the exact atom. Area Crawford's man was administering his search. The complete of boots chock-full anon aloft them. Through gaps in the floorboards, Tobias could see the outline of a man with a burglarized absolutely blockage anniversary bend of the barn. They had maybe 30 abnormal afore he apparent the added entrance. Violet apprenticed article algid and brownish into his hand, a babyish derringer, the affectionate of weapon a woman in her profession ability a dumbrate in her corset for protection. 2 shots she aside adjoin his ear. Achieve them count. I can't ask you to. You're not asking, I'm offering. Her blooming eyes were angry in the dim ablaze clarification bottomward from above. Besides, cowboy, I've got added acquaintance with atrocious situations than you do. The man aloft them confused adjoined the ladder arch to the attic area. Martha's safe waited. If he climbed up there, he'd accept the aerial arena and a bright attempt at anyone arising from the tunnel. But if they acted now while he was focused, on the search they ability accept abruptness on their side. Tobias fabricated his decision. He pushed accessible the added avenue as agilely as accessible and formed out abaft a accumulation of hay bales, the derringer accessible in his hand. The searcher was 20 FT'd away, his aback angry as he advised the attic ladder. Drop the rifle, Tobias said softly. The man spun about with able speed, but Violet was already arising from the attic abaft him, and she confused like addition who'd spent years actual by actuality faster and smarter than men with bigger guns. She best up a pitchfork from the bank and apprenticed the aciculate tines adjoin the aback of his close, afore he could accompany his weapon to bear. Deputy Marshal Crawford, I presume, she said sweetly. Admitting we both apperceive that brand is as absolute as your affair for federal law, Crawford was a alpine man with the affectionate of scars that came from years of agitated work. He didn't attending afraid, which fabricated him added alarming than addition, who ability panic. Miss McCall, adjudicator Morrison will be admiring. To see you again. I'm abiding he will be. Appropriate up until the moment those analysis maps get delivered to the absolute federal authorities. Violet's articulation agitated a aplomb that Tobias hoped wasn't absolutely bluff. Acquaint me, Crawford. Does Morrison apperceive that Tobias ample out what Martha's ancestor accurate in those maps? Article confused in Crawford's expression. What maps? The catechism came too bound with too abundant 18-carat. Curiosity. Crawford didn't apperceive about the safe. Morrison had beatific him to annihilate Tobias and abduction Violet, but he hadn't told his assassin killers about the absolute abundance hidden in the barn loft. The analysis maps that prove Morrison's been falsifying geological letters for railroad companies for the accomplished 5 years, Tobias said, arena fourth with Violet's bluff. The ones that appearance he's been affairs mineral rights to acreage that belongs to the federal government. Crawford's face went pale. The abomination like that wouldn't aloof a company bottomward Morrison. It would accuse every territorial official who'd been allotment of the conspiracy. Men like Crawford, who'd been demography Morrison's money, would face federal Bastille, or worse. Those maps don't exist, Crawford said. But his articulation lacked conviction. Then why are you here? Violet apprenticed the pitchfork harder ajoin his neck. Why did Morrison accelerate 6 armed men to annihilate 1 agriculturist and abduction 1 prostitute? What's so admired about this accurate allotment of acreage that it's a count murder? That's a back they heard horses abutting the agronomical at a bounding gallop. Multiple riders effective fast and with purpose. Through the barn window, Tobias could see torches in the distance. At atomic 4 men branch anon adjoin his property. Back up, he asked Crawford. The man's smile was algid and predatory. Insurance? Morrison doesn't like abrogation of part ends. And he abnormally doesn't like abrogation of part ends that ability apperceive about non-existent analysis maps. Violet met Tobias's eyes aloft the barn, and he saw the aforementioned abhorrent, compassionate, reflected there. Morrison hadn't aloof beatific men to annihilate them. He'd beatific men to annihilate anybody involved, including his own assassin guns. Crawford and his assembly knew too abundant about Morrison's operations to be accustomed to survive. Those riders aren't actuality to advise you, Tobias told Crawford. They're actuality to apple pie up Morrison's mess, all of it. For the aboriginal time aback they'd captured him, Crawford looked absolutely afraid. Crawford's abhorrence became their salvation. Faced with the best amid assertive afterlife from Morrison's cleanup aggregation or ambiguous adaptation with his above targets, he chose the devil he could accommodate with. There's a back aisle through the canyon, he said quickly, his beforehand, aplomb absolutely abandoned. My horse is angry abaft the house. If we move now, we can be gone afore Morrison's killers arrive. After we get those maps, Violet said firmly, befitting the pitchfork apprentice to join his neck. Tobias climbed to the attic with Crawford's burglar eyes while Violet watched their prisoner. The safe was absolutely area he remembered, hidden, below old horse blankets and abandoned acreage equipment. His easily befuddled as he formed the aggregate Martha had fabricated, him acquire years ago, abashed the apparatus ability except decayed shut. The lock clicked open, and central were the formed analysis abstracts that would change everything. Her father's accurate autography, abundant mineral deposits, baptized rights, and acreage boundaries that contradicted every official territorial map from the accomplished decade. Railroad companies had paid Morrison astronomical bribes for rights to acreage that was either abandoned or belonged to the federal government. Got them, he alleged down, capacity the map's central his shirt. The complete of abutting horses was accepting closer. Through the barn window, Tobias could see 4 riders with torches, their faces hidden below hat brims pulled low. These weren't lawmen or alike assassin accoutrements aggravating to attending official. These were executioners. Crawford had been cogent the accuracy about one thing. Morrison was eliminating anybody affiliated to this operation. Move, Violet, ordered, and the 3 of them ran for Crawford's horse. The beastly was a athletic bay adult congenital for affiliated distances and asperous terrain. Crawford Army first, afresh helped Violet up abaft him, while Tobias swung assimilate his own horse from the corral. They rode adamantine adjoin the coulee trail, abrogation abaft the abandoned home Tobias had any time known. Abaft them, orange ablaze bloomed, adjoin the black as torches affected dry wood. Morrison's men were afire his ranch, antibacterial, any affirmation that ability affixed their bang up to the night's activities. The abode area Martha had died, the barn area he'd planned to abundance hay for beasts he'd never own. All of it dematerialization in flames. but Crawford's bounded ability accepted invaluable. The coolie aisle was attenuated and treacherous. Absurd to chase in Black Afterwards edition who knew every about-face and switchback. By dawn they were 30 and abroad and aggressive adjoined the territorial capital. 3 canicule later, they sat in the appointment of Federal Marshal William Hayes, watching him appraise the analysis abstracts with growing admiration and fury. Hayes was one of the few Federal Admiral Morrison hadn't been able to buy or intimidate, and the affirmation advance aloft his board represented the better territorial bribery case in Western history. Adjudicator Morrison will face federal accused for conspiracy, fraud, and murder. Hayes told them Crawford's affidavit accumulated with these abstracts will put him abroad for life. Crawford accepted amnesty in barter for his cooperation, nodded, grimly. Morrison's arrangement alcove into 7 territories and involves at atomic 20 federal appointees. This is activity to accompany bottomward bisected the territorial government. Tobias about heard them. He was watching Violet, who stood at the marshal's window. Attractive out at the alive basic city, she'd been quiet aback abrogation the ranch, processing the absoluteness that her years of active were assuredly over. What happens now? He asked her aback. They were abandoned al fresco the federal building. She angry to face him, and he saw article in her blooming eyes he hadn't apparent before. Peace. Now I affirm adjoin Morrison and advice achieve abiding he never hurts anyone else. She stepped closer, a budding abundant that he could aroma the soap she'd acclimated at the boarding abode instead of the big-ticket aroma from that aboriginal night. And afresh, if you'll accept me, I'd like to advise you clean that ranch. I don't accept a agronomical anymore. Morrison's men austere it to the ground. But you accept the land and the government's activity to atone you for your losses, additional immersement for what Morrison put you through. Her smile was bendable and genuine. Besides, I've got some money adored up, abundant to buy beasts and barge and whatever abroad we need. 6 months later, Tobias Crow stood on the balustrade of his new house watching his wife tend the vegetable garden she'd buried abaft the rebuilt barn. Violet had traded her blood-soaked dresses for applied worky clothes and her corrective, aperture for the accustomed even, that came from honest activity beneath the western sun. She'd kept her babble about allowance rebuild, but added than that, she'd helped him clean himself. The abandoned widower hour, who'd ordered a mail adjustment, helpmate was gone, replaced by a man who'd abstruse that adulation could abound in the best abrupt soil. Adjudicator Morrison died in federal Bastille 18 months into his sentence, asleep by inmates who apparent his history of base women and children. Crawford started a new activity as he accepted constable in California, and the analysis maps that had about amount them their lives became the foundation for new federal legislation. Attention territorial acreage rights. Sometimes in the evenings, Tobias would acquisition Violet account the bi-weekly accounts of Morrison's trial. Authoritative abiding amends was absolutely actuality served. But mostly she looked advanced instead of backward, planning improvements to their agronomical and talking about the accouchement they hoped to accession there. The agriculturist had ordered a helpmate and accustomed instead the adulation of his life. Some mistakes, as it angry out, were the best things that could appear to a man. If you enjoyed this story, bang the video on your awning now to watch edition acclaimed account area afterlife and adventuresomeness. Bang in agency you never expected. Don't balloon to subscribe and exceed a cool babble to advise us accumulate, bringing you added belief like these. Your abutment agency aggregate to us.